Let's begin. Welcome everybody, including Cliff. I just finished reading the book. And that's one reason I assign pages week by week, is so that I'm not overwhelmed at the beginning. And I found in Stevenson's last two chapters, in his epilogue and postscript, a deep feeling for things of the spirit and for our common humanity, for things that unite us with one another, regardless of whether you believe in God or whatever. And I would just like us, as we begin today, to acknowledge in our own spirits and minds how these issues of criminal justice are not abstract, they're very real. These touch real human beings. So I'd like us to remember, one by one, picture in our mind's eye and holding in our heart the victims of crime, the perpetrators of crime, police officers, state's attorneys, defense attorneys, legislators who pass laws, governors and other governmental executives who enforce laws, family members of those who are incarcerated, facing multiple issues of health, spiritual health, mental health, the children of the incarcerated, and people like Cliff and Brian Stevenson and others who are working to help lives one by one, but also make needed change to our criminal justice system. We hold each person in mind and heart, offering our connection to them as fellow human beings. Amen. So Cliff, again, we welcome you. I did direct people to your bio, but I'd like to just highlight a couple things in your biographical sketch and then turn it over to you. Cliff Nellis's call to work with youth and young adults involved the criminal justice system occurred in 2002 when he pedaled his bicycle from Denver to San Diego and then to Miami with a Bible. I hope you had something more than a Bible, but that's all it says here. Cliff had just finished his federal clerkship in Denver after graduating from the University of Chicago Law School. On that bike trip, Cliff became a follower of Jesus and happened to cross a guard shack in front of a boys' correctional facility outside Springer, New Mexico. After striking up a conversation with the guard, Cliff was alarmed by the number of times the guard told him the kids in the facility had no hope. The guard said the kids would come in at 13 years old, return at 14, 15, 16, and then go on to spend the rest of their lives in adult prison. The conversation haunted Cliff, and as he pedaled on to San Diego and Miami, Cliff began to pray for youth in juvenile correctional facilities and asked God to give him a vision for serving them. When Cliff returned to Illinois, he enrolled at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School and received a Master of Divinity. It was at Trinity that Cliff met the wonderful people at the Lawndale Community Church, as well as the Christian Community Development Association. Through these relationships, Cliff was given a broader vision for what ministry to court-involved youth could look like. In 2009, Cliff moved to North Lawndale to live and raise his family there, and to help found the Lawndale Christian Legal Center with the mission of providing an integrated legal and social services to court-involved youth. Cliff holds a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy and English from my alma mater, Illinois Wesleyan University, a Master of Divinity from Trinity Evangelical, and a law degree from the University of Chicago. He's licensed to practice law in Illinois. Cliff is also enrolled in the Executive MBA program at the University of Chicago, Booth School of Business, to learn better how to scale what his agency is doing across Cook County and ultimately the nation in order to transform our criminal justice system for youth 24 and older. So Cliff, Executive Director of Lawndale Christian Legal Center, welcome. And I think among the folks who are on this call today, I think we have all read or are familiar with Brian Stevenson's book, so I think you can refer to it. And tell us a little bit about your center and about what you see as the pressing issues involving juveniles and emerging adults up to age 24 in our system. Cliff, you are frozen.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there you are.
Now we can, yes.
Oh, all right. Right when you passed the baton to me, you froze on my phone. But
Okay.
now I'm back.
You are back. I think we're
all right.
We're all here.
Hopefully, hopefully we make it through. I apologize if you joined since I first joined. My laptop crashed today, and it's very hard to work remotely during this pandemic time without a laptop. So I logged onto my phone, and my phone usually has very good reception. I'm in my house. I can actually go right next to the router just in case, if that helps. But so I think you had asked to tell a little bit about the legal center and what I think, and then you said something about the pressing issues. But I didn't hear the end of it. I'm assuming pressing issues with the criminal justice system, perhaps?
Yes, and especially the cohort with the juveniles and also emerging adults. And you can bring it right to your locality there in North Lawndale.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm always very interested in meeting with folks like you to discuss this. I can't see everybody on the phone, but obviously my faith journey has been a personal part of the work I do in justice and righting these wrongs. And so it's a nice blend to be able to speak to folks who are also on some faith journey of their own in wrestling with these issues. I can't see everybody on the phone or on the thing, but I know that at least the first few people I saw were white females. Now I'm looking at an African-American male. I don't know what your name is, but I mentioned that, hello. I mentioned that because one of the things that's happened since George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Amy Cooper, that string a couple months ago, that I think is positive and I'm happy to see, is that I've had more white people I grew up in Lake Zurich, northwest suburb of Chicago. I went to Illinois Wesleyan University, went to law school, University of Chicago, I clerked for a federal judge in Denver. Most of my circles have been predominantly affluent white communities. And over the last 11 years that I've lived in North Lawndale, my world really reshaped dramatically, where I started to see all the issues that I thought I had once understood much differently. And criminal justice being a very profound issue, where the way in which our criminal justice system interacts with communities, white communities versus communities of color, is dramatically different. And it's been alarming, I guess is the best, angering, infuriating. And I've only been doing it for 11 years. And up until I moved into North Lawndale in 2009, was relatively insulated from the life and experience of our young people and old people alike in North Lawndale, and would have never said everything I'm going to say today 11 years ago, quite literally. I probably would have said and thought the opposite of just about everything I believe today when it comes to the criminal justice system. It's institutional bias, it's racist outcomes, and disparate treatments of African-American versus whites. And it's really on a community-wide level. It's really what happens in North Lawndale as a comparison to what happens in communities like Lake Zurich, where I grew up. And so, Brian Stevenson is a hero of mine. I think he's a phenomenal lawyer. He's changed the landscape of our criminal justice system by taking some very specific cases all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States and winning. And because of his work, There are punishments now that are unconstitutional for minors. We are putting them to death. Sadly, we were doing that before. We are not giving mandatory life sentences for minors. Sadly, we were doing that before. So there was some pretty extreme penalties out there for children that we were doing across the country.
You're frozen.
Yeah, Cliff, if you can hear me.
Showcases another part of his work, which is
you cut out just a little bit there.
Oh,
just a
okay.
few seconds ago, you cut out. So,
did I talk about did you hear about how he changed this landscape from the
yes.
Supreme Court? Okay, so those decisions changed the landscape of what's constitutional punishment. But then the other arm of his work is featured in the movie and in the book Just Mercy, where it's representing people on death row. And this is where I want to start by framing this conversation in what I hope is a attention grab. Flagrantly, I'm flagrantly throwing out here that I want to grab your attention and shock you a little bit. And it's going to sound odd because I just told you how much I admire Bryan Stevenson and his work. I want to put him out of business, and I mean that. If you think about the book Just Mercy, and I don't really mean that, just so you know, like, I don't want to put him out of business. Obviously, it's not personal. He's a phenomenal lawyer. He's a great guy. I want his work to continue, and I support it personally, financially, and I've gone to his site multiple times. But what I mean is, we don't want innocent people on death row, right? But if you think about his work, and this is the part that I think I'm going to hammer this, however long we have today, death row inmates are a small fraction, probably less than 1% of the 7.5 million people involved in our criminal justice system. We have almost 2.2 million in jail, and then another 4.5 million are on probation or parole. So they're all under the authority of our prison system, but some of them are on probation, some of them are on parole, and some of them are actually incarcerated. And I'm sure you all know this, but we had 2.5 million, we have the most incarceration of any country on the planet. A lot of the statistics thrown around are 25% of the world's, we have 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's incarcerated population. And then, of course, if you've read a book like Michelle Alexander's Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness, you know that the numbers are disproportionately people of color, and Black people even more so than brown Latinos and Mexicans. But Black people by far are being treated the worst by our criminal justice system. And what I want to highlight is, if you think about Bryan Stevenson works, most people respond like, wow, I didn't know this was going on. This was recent. This is like happening today. These people just came home in the last 5 years. How did I not know about this? But the wow should be much bigger, because this is what I don't want this book or this movie to anybody to think is that it represents the magnitude of the problem. When you have a statistic at the end of the movie, it's put up 1 out of 9 people on death row have been proven to be innocent. That's through the Innocence Project that's going on around all the country. That is an appalling figure, but we're still talking about 1% of the entire population of people with justice involved. And if you think about what happened in Walter McMillan's case, that is not unique to people on death row. In fact, you would think that the public defenders and other people are probably putting more resources toward the more serious cases, such that that's the best we're going to do. Like, the people who we're going to send to death or give a life sentence, we're going to really, thoroughly review these cases. We're going to do that more so than the average case that comes through because of the consequences. And what I'm here to say is, it's widespread, rampant abuse, and the bar is extraordinarily low. As a profession, as a defense lawyer, the bar is extraordinarily low. I am very close friends with Amy Campanelli, the Cook County Public Defender. She's a wonderful person. She's a phenomenal lawyer, and she has a vision for her office that I would say is similar to my vision for indigent defense, where we share the same vision. She would be the first one to say that her office and other public defenders' offices across the country are not providing effective assistance of counsel to all the people coming through. They don't have enough funding. They don't have enough lawyers. They're ranging between 150 and 350 cases per lawyer, which is bananas. But my point of highlighting this is that when you look at our criminal justice system, there's so many flaws and so many points of failure. But one of the things that I think if you watch the movie and read this book, you can't miss is my daughter, who's 7 years old, about to be 8 in a month, could have represented Walter McMillan and beat that case. That was not a hard case. He was literally at home at a party with about 20 witnesses. Had a lawyer worth any salt taken 5 minutes to interview him and go and interview some witnesses, they resurrected this case how many years later, decades later, and they found flyers about the picnic. You know what I mean? Like, can you imagine if somebody on the moment of arrest or at the first court date was actually doing this when it was fresh and there was even more evidence? This would have been a slam dunk by any competent lawyer. I mean, any incompetent lawyer, frankly. But what happens, and this happens, and part of our problem with our system is that we are overspending on policing, prosecuting, and incarceration. And we're spending, one report from the Bureau of Justice says we spend $300 billion a year. Another report by Washington University says that they estimate it's actually $1.2 trillion a year that we spend, because if you include loss of wages, healthcare, children of incarcerated parents, they're using a little bit more of a societal cost model. But whether it's the $300 billion that the Bureau of Justice identified through direct payment to policing, prosecuting, and incarceration, or the $1.2 trillion, that's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. And it's a failure. It is a waste, and we're paying for it, all of us. We are all spending this money because it's our tax-paying dollars. And it's a miserable failure. And there's so much better we could be doing with those resources, or even less. But one of the things I want to highlight is one of the reasons why we focus on 24 and under. There's developmental psychology, there's neurobiology, there's sociological reasons. It's a unique phase of life. But half of criminal justice involved people across the nation are 24 and under. So you've got about, depending upon where you're at, 30 to 40% are usually in the 18 to 24-year-old range. And then the other part are minors, and then the rest are 25 and older. So almost half. We're spending $300 billion. So about $150 billion if you just cut it in half. If it's the $1.2 trillion, cut that in half. You know, you're talking about a lot of money that we're using to do predominantly three things: police.
You're frozen again. You're frozen. You cut out. I can't hear you.
We hope he'll come back in, Eleanor.
Know that these are meaningful phases of life where we could be doing better.
Cliff, we just lost you again for a few seconds.
Okay.
Maybe.
I don't know what to.
You were talking about prices, money.
So
You had done number one, policing, and then
prosecuting, which, you know, the cost of prosecution is up as a public defender, is a clerk, a court reporter, a judge, and of course the state's attorney's office, sheriffs in the courtroom. So it's, you know, it's a very expensive operation. And so let's go now to what we do at the legal center. But I do want to talk about the racial bias, but just some bare bones structure overall. So we focus on young people 24 and under. We have a holistic, community-based, community-led model. And those three things, community-based, community-led, and holistic, are what I believe is the transformation of our system. And why I'm going back to school, to learn how to scale operations across Cook County, and ultimately we want to transform it across the country. And the premise that I have is that I know from the last 11 years of doing this that we can do substantially better for our young people 24 and under. And what would be if this were normal, if this was the way of doing things across the country, across Cook County, how many people 25 and older would actually be caught in this revolving door of poverty and incarceration and violence? And I think it'd be dramatically less. I think the impact would be a dramatic reduction in incarceration and a dramatic reduction in costs, criminal justice all across the board, from policing, prosecuting, incarceration. And we know it from 11 years of experience. So what do? Every young person comes through our office. We serve juveniles in juvenile court, emerging adults in adult court. We call emerging adults 18 to 24-year-olds. So 2 divisions, 1 in juvenile court, 1 in emerging adult and adult court. And every person comes to our doors, gets a lawyer, a case manager, an outreach worker, some outreach support. And those 3 people form an attorney-client privilege team. The social worker side is doing clinical assessments. They usually have their BSW, MSW, LCSW, LCPC, but have a little bit more of a clinical experience. And they're doing assessments. They're finding out what's going on at home, in the neighborhood, in the community, at school, at work, and sort of putting together a treatment plan. At the same time, our lawyers, of course, are representing our young people in court. Now, it's really important to understand, and this is sort of gives you the foundation for understanding why racism is so ugly in the criminal justice system. It is really important to understand that social determinations and legal determinations are the same determinations in criminal court. When you are looking at somebody and determining whether or not they're a flight risk and their bond should be high or low because you don't know whether they should be free pending trial, that's fundamentally a determination about the value and worth of the person in front of you. When you talk about sentencing, should this person have a felony record, a permanent record, or should they go to jail or not? That's fundamentally an evaluation of whether or not you believe this person's going to go do bad things or go do good things. And if implicit bias is real, which I think, with all due respect to anybody who's doubting it, do the research. It's not a question. And that means we as white people, and it's not just white people, but white people have driven white supremacy in our country for centuries, and it still lingers. And so we have to examine our own implicit bias. I've had to do mine. I've lived in North Lawndale for 11 years, and I've had to own why did I have that reaction? What is that about? So implicit bias is not just pointing at the criminal justice system. The first person usually involved in the criminal justice system is the person who calls 911. That's you and me. That's Amy Cooper. And so I just think what I want to lay out the foundation though is social determinations, legal determinations are the same thing. So for us, holistic, having lawyers and social workers working together is a very powerful form of advocacy, particularly in the criminal defense field, where at every step of the process, you're really putting forth a person, a life, and their value to whether it's a police officer, or a judge, a state's attorney, or the parole board, to say that they should be home, they should have services, we should support, and we should work with them and not saddling them with felony records and permanent incarceration. So our trifold team puts together these social plans, and then we have a network of people that we've developed over the last 10 years in the neighborhood called the North Lawndale Community Restorative Justice Hub. That hub is a network of providers in housing, mentoring, workforce development, mental health, substance abuse counseling, and they are our partners that we attempt to raise money for them so that we have contracts with them to serve X number of young people we're going to serve every year and provide those critical wraparound supports. So our model is community-based, community-led, and holistic. So I kind of covered holistic: the lawyer, case manager, outreach worker, wraparound supports in the community. Community-based and community-led, I think, is as game-changing as holistic. The current system has been designed and is currently led by predominantly two occupations: lawyers and law enforcement. That is a very limited view of the issue. It's a very, very limited view. And they're not trained in psychology. They're not trained in developmental psychology, neurobiology, sociology. They don't have that social work, public health, mental health perspective on youth development. But in addition to that, most of the lawyers and law enforcement that are leading and implementing this system are not from communities like North Lawndale. In fact, they would never even dare step in a neighborhood like North Lawndale. And the problem you have there then is you have people with very different lived experience, assuming that their experience is the universal experience, and it is not. And then they make decisions based upon somebody's worth and culpability in a situation, and they have zero understanding of what this young person's life is, what the decisions they're navigating on a day-to-day basis, the supports they need, the supports that are available to them in their own community. And we have this mindset of, again, if you only have a hammer, you get out and you hammer somebody. If you only know police, prosecute, and incarcerate,
Cliff, if you can.
started the legal center. We're residents of North Lawndale.
Cliff, we lost you just for a few seconds again. Sorry.
Okay. Am I back?
You are with us completely.
Okay. All right. So 100% of our board of directors, residents of North Lawndale. 70% of our staff, residents of North Lawndale. If I could hire 100% of the people from North Lawndale, it'd be 100%. And the reason is that now you have people who are working with our young people. It's very hard to dehumanize your neighbor. It's very hard to dehumanize your cousin, your uncle, your aunt, your friend. But if you're from a community like Lake Zurich and you don't really understand what's happening in a community like North Lawndale, and you get is news reports and all the negative commentary about young Black youth in our society, you fill in a lot of gaps with some really bad stuff. And so having people that are from the neighborhood be responsible, if you will, for leading the system and re-envisioning and recreating something different, I think is game changing because of the simple fact that they have shared experience. They tend to be far more compassionate. They don't give up on their own young people, and they understand their life, and they're far more able to relate and understand what the problem and the solution is for this young person and how to help them through it. I have been on a very steep learning curve and I realized very early on that young people were coming to me with challenges that I was like, wow, one, I've never had to deal with that. Two, I don't know what that solution is. I think I'm here to support you, listen, and we're going to try to work it out together. But the two Americas is very real. And it's funny. Yesterday, was in 2014 was when Michael Brown was shot and killed, and my Facebook memory feed popped up my post, and and my post was actually from Trayvon Martin in 2012. So I'd been in the neighborhood for 2 years, and my parents still live in Lake Zurich, so I'll still go out there. And I remember distinctly this weekend when I wrote this post on Facebook, I was out on the boat. And the officer came by. I don't even remember. I don't even know. I don't know whether maybe we didn't have a life jacket or something like that. But he came over and we started talking to him almost as if we were talking to a friend who we were about to have a beer with. And it was just like, hey, how you doing? Oh, can we help you? Blah, blah, blah. It was this very cordial, you would have thought I was talking to my friend. And it stuck out to me for the first time. And at that point, probably, I'm 45, so, 35 years. And I was like, wow, that interaction was distinctly different than the interactions that even I have with police in North Lawndale, but like what our young people experience with police in North Lawndale, nothing like that. And I can't hammer home how pervasive that culture is. I mean, I will be mowing my lawn and an officer's come out and said, you really should be, I didn't realize I was mowing, I don't know what he thought I was doing, but presumed I didn't live in the neighborhood and said, hey, you should be out of here before dark. And I was like, well, I live here. And he goes, oh, well, I'll watch your house. And I was like, well, maybe you should watch my neighbor's house too, because I know them. Let me introduce them. They're pretty good people too. And then the number of times I've seen my neighbors outside my house, being pulled out of their car, their entire car searched. I mean, everything pulled out, the trunk pulled out. I literally now go out when I see this and I will stand there to keep it honest, because I know that my presence as a white male, for sure, if the second they learn that I'm a lawyer, turns things, switches it a little bit. And the way that they speak to our youth, the way they talk about them, even in a courtroom. I mean, sometimes it's the how open it is, how it's not, they don't even know it. They're talking about kids like thugs and animals, and they don't even know who they're talking about. And they have no idea how offensive it is because they don't know that young person. And when you get to know their family, when you get to know their friends, when you literally get to meet their grandma and their mom and their dad and their cousins and their brothers, and you're in the same neighborhood with them, you start to see things much differently. And you're like, that is really wrong. It's wrong for you to say. You don't understand it because God only knows why, but it's not right. And when you do it in a cloth of power, when you have either the power of a police, a state's attorney, or a judge. Oops, did I lose you guys? Am I good?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Huh.
There you are. You're back.
Okay. All right. Let me, I don't know what's going on. My internet's connection is strong, but so, let me just tell you, like, these are little things, but then there's big things. So I go to the Circuit Court of Cook County 26 in California or Markham. There's an attorney parking lot. There's attorney entrances. Attorneys go before their case is called. If your client's in custody, you go behind the bench, what we call the bullpen. It's where everybody's locked up. And you go back there and you visit your client before they get called out for their case. And never have I ever been carded at any of those situations. I had 2 African-American female lawyers with me that were in my car, and I drive into the attorney parking lot. And before I got into the lot, and I just was gonna turn down the first lane to park, and a sheriff pulled right up beside me, like was gonna cut me off, and it stopped. And I was like, "Officer, can I help you?" And they asked for the ID of my lawyers. They were lawyers in my car. And this is like 5 years ago in Chicago. This is the South. This isn't Alabama. This is Chicago. And they first said, your clients need to park in the front lot, in the public lot. You can't bring them back. And I said, they're lawyers. Same thing when I brought a Hispanic lawyer through the attorney entrance. We're walking through, and he stops him and asks for his ID. And I look at him like, are you gonna ask for my ID? Doesn't ever ask for my ID. Stopped, same lawyer as we were going to the bullpen at 26 in California. And I'm standing right next to them, and they don't ask for my ID. And we're both in suits. We're both in suits and ties. I mean, we both look and speak and dress like lawyers because we are. And when the alarm has gone off at the legal center, because oftentimes, especially in the first 5-6 years, I was pulling late hours, and sometimes people would close up and didn't know I was still up there, and I would move and it would trip the this motion sensors. I'd come downstairs and there'd be officers there, and a couple of the local pastors get notified too. So we all were downstairs. They're literally asking for Pastor Joe's ID, who's the president of our board of directors, and not asking for mine. And now, mind you, there's no report. There was nobody called 911 said an African-American broke in this building. It was an alarm went off, and they were responding to our alarm system. That's it. That was it. And they didn't ask for my ID. And those are little things. I think one of the most profound moments where I realized, like, wow, what is going on, was, again, this was 2010 or 11. I had been representing a young person in the neighborhood for about a year. Got to know his family very well. Knew he was out of custody pending trial. We were going to take him to a baseball game. We were going to the Cubs game. We got like 40 tickets. And I was picking up his
Cliff, we just lost you again. If you can hear me, we can't hear you.
right where he lives. Sat there. I'm looking out the window.
Hey, Cliff,
Yeah.
we lost you at the Cubs game.
So I was picking up one of my client's younger brothers, and he's sitting outside he's standing outside on the sidewalk. And I pull up and I roll down my window, and I'm looking at him. He's looking at me, and then suddenly he exhaled, and his shoulders, he like relaxed his shoulders. He goes, whew. He goes, Cliff, man, I thought you were the cops. I was going to run. And I was like, what did you just say? You're like 8 years old. You're doing nothing wrong at all. You're waiting for me to pick you up and take you to a Cubs game. And there was fear. I saw it because I was wondering, I was like, dude, are you going to get in the car? And he was like, whew. And he knew me. I mean, yes, I'm white, and I'm not that. I stick out a little bit in North Lawndale, but like, I'm not new to the family. But his reaction as an 8-year-old was fear that I was a police officer that had pulled over and maybe wanted to talk to him. And there is reasons for this. This is not some made up thing that, Black people are just scared of police for no reason. And I'm not saying every Black person on the planet or in the country or even in the Chicagoland area is, but I can tell you in communities like North Lawndale, for sure.
We've lost you again, Cliff.
Profoundly different. And I see somebody who has a question, or maybe.
We lost you again. You were saying communities like North Lawndale was the last thing you had said.
I think I was just saying that communities like North Lawndale, the policing is very different. It comes off very different. And I'll end by saying, because I want to see what questions. I really wish I could see everybody. It's hard to do this when I can only see one person at a time. But feel free to interrupt. Please interrupt if you have questions. And I won't be able to see wave a hand or anything. So just blurt it out and I'll stop.
And I can help field questions as well. There are 10 of us on the call right now, I do believe, just for your information.
Okay. I'll keep going until somebody interrupts. We
do want to have some time though for questions.
Oh, for sure. Yes. And it's what time are we going to? It's 1:30.
So 2:15. Yeah, we've got about 35 more minutes.
Okay. Sorry, we're taking like 15, 20 minutes of Q&A.
Yeah, or even more. This is
Okay.
a very curious group that will have a lot to respond with.
All right. Well, let me make this last point and then we'll open it up. What I feel like has become unmistakably apparent to me as somebody who's been practicing the Circuit Court of Cook County now for 11 years, doing work that I never thought I'd do, by the way. I never was going to be a criminal defense lawyer. If at every step of the system, there's massive discretion. Everybody gets to use extraordinary amounts of discretion, starting with who calls 911. Then when police officers arrive, how do they handle the situation? If they make an arrest, that gets referred to the state's attorney's office. State's attorney's office has massive discretion. Prosecute or not, let it go, come hard, go in the middle, go low. And then judges who determine bond, judges and juries who determine not guilty or guilty, and then sentencing. Massive amounts of discretion. The only area there's not so much discretion is in the decision of a jury or a judge when determining guilty or not. It's not a really discretionary, it's a weighing of the evidence. But at every step of that system, if the fundamental determination is the value or of the person before you, then what you see happening on a day-to-day basis is that white people who are presumed to be good people, and young people in particular, are given incredible deference and leniency. The presumption is they're young, they're making mistakes, they did something stupid, but we don't want to prevent them from going on and doing all the great things they're going to do. They're going to be a blessing to our society, and we don't want to put them in jail. We don't want to put them with a felony record. We want to let them go on and do good things because the presumption is they're going to be a blessing. When you have a young African-American male from North Lawndale, from the minute they are in contact with anybody, even from people calling 911 or the police who respond, the presumption is that they are a danger to society and that you want to prevent them from doing the bad things they're going to do. You don't want to, on the one hand, you don't want to prevent people from doing all the great things you're going to do, but on this hand, you want to prevent them from doing the bad things. So we want to put them in jail. We want to put felony records on them. We want to be able to track them and follow them and put them in registries. And if that basic premise is at every step of the way, that's why you have a situation where a 17-year-old in North Lawndale who was in his own school playing basketball with a friend. After hours, he broke into the school. All they were doing was playing basketball. No properties missing, nothing. They're playing basketball. Lights are on in the building. Community member calls the police. Police arrive. In that moment, the police could do nothing. Literally refer to the school, call the principal, say do a detention. They'll fix the lock. They'll give them a demerit, whatever the thing you do at school administration. Or if you wanted to go a little farther, you could bring them to the police station, call their parents, have them pick them up, go home. You could go a little farther, say, okay, I'm going to charge you with a misdemeanor, criminal trespass to land, criminal damage to property. Or you could do, in this case, class 2 felony for burglary. Because burglary, the interesting thing is, it's breaking and entering with the intent, the intention. You don't have to have done anything, the intention to commit a felony. So now you're looking at somebody and saying, I think I know what these young kids were up to. And if it's a white kid playing basketball in their gym in Lake Zurich or a black kid playing basketball in their gym in North Lawndale, the presumptions are very different. And no.
Cliff, we've lost you again.
The judge who doesn't have control over the decision of what to charge, but
We lost, I'm sorry, Cliff, we lost you at the presumptions are very different.
Oh boy. Well, I think I'm sorry that it's such a spotty connection. I really don't know what's going on today. It's a little bit of a bizarre day, but why don't we open it up for questions?
Yeah, even though we're having some technical issues, I think we're getting 99% of your passion, your expertise, your commitment and heart. This is awesome. So let's have some questions and responses. Let me field them, Cliff, since you can't see everybody. Junia Hedberg.
Yes, and I'm sorry, I have to leave in 10 minutes, so I'm glad to ask first, and thank you so much. Do you see any hope in all of this, in the discussion that we hear all the time about reforming the police in Chicago? Is there any hope in that for the people in Lawndale, for example?
Yeah, I think that I wouldn't say there's no hope. I'm going to contradict myself. I have incredible hope that we can transform the criminal justice system. And part of that is because of what we're doing on the ground in North Lawndale. We have partners in 8 other communities that do very similar work, and we can slide lawyers in there. And with a training budget alone and extra lawyers, we can scale this up pretty quickly in Cook County for 24 and under, legal social hubs across the county. And we have remarkable alignment right now with Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, J.B. Pritzker, the Cook County Board President, the county commissioners, Chief Judge Timothy Evans, Kim Fox. I mean, we have a slate of reformers. Even the mayor. I mean, I think we have a slate of reformers where we can really substantively transform our criminal justice system for 24 and under. And I believe we will succeed in doing that in the next 4 years here in Cook County. Police is a different question. I will admit that I have lost a lot of trust and confidence in the Chicago Police Department. I've seen too much. It's been too rampant. And what I always say about the police department is that if you think about like Laquan McDonald, most people think of the officer who shot him 16 times. And that's a problem. But that's not the biggest problem of that situation. By far, it's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that you had about 20 officers on scene, none of whom reported him. 4 of whom literally falsified reports. So you have a culture that you stick together and over years, over time, and we have a pretty bad history with previous superintendents, with known torture, known abuse, and that stuff is being covered up. So you have a culture that we stick together. And so I am not optimistic about police reform. I do believe.
Oh, no.
Cliff, you're frozen and we can't hear you.
And 69 police officers.
So, Cliff, we lost you at, you said you're not optimistic about police reform, but.
Oh, shoot. That was a while ago. I'm not optimistic about police reform, but I am optimistic. I do believe in defunding the police. I do think that that's a conversation that I'm glad to see is happening. And it doesn't mean 100%. It means, and it's not just the police, it's the criminal justice system and institutional intervention as a whole, and policing, prosecuting, and incarceration. That $300 billion waste or $1.2 trillion waste, though that money needs to be diverted to holistic, community-based, community-led operations. You will get far more for your dollar, and you will have far better. I mean, you'll just have a more just, and fair system, particularly for youth. But I'm not super optimistic about transforming CPD just because it's a deep cultural problem, I think. And but I do think that we can. I think that we can work. I mean, I'm not going to stop trying, and we are going to be working with. We've worked with CPD on some diversion efforts, which is there's a facility called the Juvenile Intervention Support Center, which is supposed to be a youth specialized police station. It was a miserable failure. The Inspector General just wrote a report on it. It's been in the news, miserable failure. And it was nothing unique. I represented young people there over the last 11 years. It was no different than any other police station. And so it's not easy. We are in it. We're going to do the best we can to move the needle toward holistic community-based interventions in lieu of policing, prosecuting, incarceration. But I don't, when we talk about defunding police, defunding prosecution, defunding incarceration, we're not talking about just like, bye-bye to the system. We're saying that there's a restorative justice process that can be implemented from the ground level that needs to be funded. And it's putting the right people with the right expertise, with the actual knowledge and understanding, compassion of understanding what's going on in the driver's seat to be the solution to the problem, which is something Brian Stevenson talks about a lot in his speeches in his book about proximity. Like those closest to the problem are the best suited to lead the solution. So I am, on one hand, I contradict myself because I do think we're going to change criminal justice in Cook County. And I do think because it's the largest circuit court in the country, it's bigger than LA, what happens here tends to be followed by others. And we have the Chief Judge Evans started the first restorative justice community court in North Lawndale. We were the lead agency in partnering with them and creating that and designing it and launching it in 2017. We're in our third year. They're launching a new one in Englewood and Avondale, and we're in conversation with the chief about doing it all across Cook County. We're in a randomized control trial evaluation being led by the University of Chicago Poverty Lab, where 880 people, those represented by the Public Defender's Office and us, are going to be evaluated both legal and social outcomes. That report's going to be very dramatic, and I think it'll show that these holistic community-based operations is far more effective, far more effective, that we actually gain public safety by supporting our young people, by doing things instead of policing, prosecuting, incarceration. So I'm optimistic about criminal justice reform. I feel like the last thing that will change is the police department, and they probably will come kicking and screaming. But I could be wrong, and I am a defense lawyer that sees the underbelly of bad policing every day. I mean, either incompetent, lazy, or just outright bad, mean. And the consequences are enormous. I mean, I could tell you, we could be here all day. I could tell you stories of young people pulled over by police in jail that night, in a bond court the next day with a $350,000 D bond with zero evidence to support this. Cases that we've had to take, thankfully, some of them we've won, but like people that shouldn't have even been stopped by police and were, and arrested and then charged under the worst of circumstances. And I'm talking the last 10 years here in Chicago, not Southern Alabama. So hopefully that was the answer to your question. I'll keep it open for others.
I like your candor, Cliff. Who else has a comment, response, question for Cliff? Yes, Jean Ebersol, and then Eleanor Prince. Jean? Jean, you are muted.
Okay. All right. So my question, thank you very much for this super informative and helpful. And one of the things that I'm sure many newly interested in, I'm wondering, how do you challenge the racist mental models of some of the people who you meet up with or who are part of the system, like the individuals you talked about, the judges, the individuals who have discretion? How do you challenge, or how do you think you could be supported in challenging and beliefs that they have?
Yeah, I mean, that's the work we do every day as lawyers, right? I mean, one of the things that most people don't probably know is that 96% of cases are pled. Means there's no trial. 96. The Supreme Court of the United States did a study on this 3 years ago, and they just ruled for the first time in our country's history that ineffective assistance of counsel, meaning like you didn't really do a good job as a lawyer under the Sixth Amendment right to a lawyer, so bad that you didn't even do that now for the first time applies during plea agreements. And I say that because plea agreements is where you put forth who this young person is. And I believe it is ineffective assistance of counsel of really epic proportion. Pleading isn't the problem. It's what are you getting for your plea, and what did you do in the negotiation? And what happens every day as we speak right now, lawyers who are representing young people going through the system will step up in court today for the first time, will not met their client, don't know anything about them, but the state's attorney on that first court date will write on, and they have little pieces of paper up at the bench, like sticky notes, and they'll write the offer on that note, hand it to them. by ethical duty, you do have to communicate that offer to your client, but you can communicate that in a lot of different ways. But most of those pleas, that's the start and end of it. There's very little advocacy done in that stage. And so there's no, in my opinion, there's no effect.
Frozen.
Cliff,
Done well. Where they done? Yeah.
hey, Cliff, we lost you at there was no effective advocacy at that stage.
Yeah, so that's the need to have a mitigation package is having effective advocacy. And a mitigation package is usually a 3 to 5 page letter that outlines who is this young person, who's their family, who's their parents, where did they grow up, what significant family members in their life, what schools do they attend, where have they gone wrong, what failures have they had. We have all their arrest records. We do a very thorough overview of who this young person is. And then we document it. We get letters of support. Here's a letter from his math teacher. Here's a letter from his younger sister. Here's the certificate he got or the award he got for Little League. You know, like you put together and you start to humanize somebody. Now I will say, I've never had to work so hard to humanize humans in my entire life, ever. It's really appalling. I could walk in with a white kid from Lake Zurich and I think I could probably not write a letter or even bring a document and I'd be able to effectively bring that kid home.
Mhm.
It's aggravating, but it's also necessary. So to answer your question, and the other thing is difficult. So when I've heard police say things, you know, in that moment, you've got to be very respectful. I'm not gonna, you know, I have challenged, but you don't want this to go even worse for your client.
Right.
And so when a judge says something stupid or a state's attorney says something stupid or a police officer says something stupid, I will respectfully challenge it. But it's in the same way if you hear, you know, a lot of Black fathers and mothers talk about how they like, this is reality. This is every Black father and mother I know in North Lawndale, literally every one of them. We'll talk about how they should interact with police. And it's, you know, 10 and 2, make your hands visible. Yes, sir. You know, like it's being deferential because you don't want it to go south, and it can get south real quick. And so in a similar way, I have white privilege is real. And so I can challenge a little more. And I'm also a lawyer, so I can pull that card, but I also have to be balanced in knowing that, you know, I don't want this to come down harder on the young people we're working with.
Right.
Thank you. Eleanor had a question, and then I've got a chat question from Nancy. Eleanor?
I will defer. Well, I just wonder, you know, in small towns, if a white boy makes, as a white small town, predominantly white, if a white child, it's not necessarily a boy, makes an error and breaks the law, often the police will talk to them and ask them to correct it. They don't even press charges in the local police station. Now, each policeman has that choice to make, how far they're going to go. And I was wondering, do they ever talk to these young people and see how they can work it out, or before they press charges? Or is it immediately they take them to the police station and they are charged? How does that work?
Yeah, it's worse. It's worse. There is never a conversation. I have not, in 11 years, ever heard of a young person being spoken to, the family, some sort of conversation about what we should do. I've gone to police station. Part of living in the neighborhood, being in the neighborhood, it means that we can be at crime scenes and at police stations very quickly. And I've gone to District 11, District 10 numerous times. And I remember one of the first cases I had, detective at District 11, which is a notoriously, you know, not great place to be, harder than to 10. Big guy, big bald guy, got probably 6'4", pretty stacked too. And I'm only 5'8", got right over me, leaning over me. And he said, "You're in my house now. I'll tell you when you can see." I went there just to ask to see my client. And he said, "Well, you're in my house now. I'll let you know when you can see your client." He was denying me access to see the kid. Now that's a lawyer. It was a 15-year-old kid in his custody. And they had ditched his family. His family had gone to District 10. They said they were gonna take him to, I can't remember where they said they were gonna take him, but they told him to follow him. They all got in the car, and at a red light, they bolted and left the family, peeled back to the crime scene, interrogated him at the scene, and then brought him over to District 11, refused me. And so I said to him, and this is one of those moments where, you know, you have to advocate, but you also are trying to get the end goal of seeing your client. And so I wanted to say, actually, you're in a house that's defined by the Constitution of the United States. And it's not your house. It's actually governed by laws and rules for good reason. But all I did was say, officer, I saw his badge. I said, officer, I'm taking down your badge number and your name, and I'm noting that I am here at this point. And if you continue to talk to my client afterwards, anything that is going on right now will never come into court. So you may as well let me see him. Now that's a strategy, because at the time, obviously I want to haul off and punch this dude, but that's not a good way of resolving it. But no, I mean, and that's what I mean about the extraordinary difference. It's not.
Cliff?
I'm sure I could be a felon.
So Cliff, the last I heard, you were about to assault a police officer.
Was probably a good.
As an attorney from the Lawndale Christian Legal Center.
That's right. It's probably a sentence that I need to complete. No, I was saying that's not what you should do in that situation, even though that's what I was feeling. I was feeling like I wanted to do that, but that's not going to help, right? I'm trying to get in and see my client and make sure that this process stays honest. So, you've got to take the high road and de-escalate in moments where, it is hard because they have authority and they're not exercising it and using it well. I don't know if that answered the question now. I kind of lost track of what the original question was.
Yes.
Okay.
So Nancy put a comment in the chat box. I think everybody can read it, but I'll read it out. When the elders in the community become the leaders as well, discuss the impact of that in itself on behavior of young people. In many traditional cultures, the elders provide rites of passage that allow young people to, quote, test their mettle and pass on to being confident adults who value and guard their community responsibly. I think I hear your holistic model's true objective being to reduce behavior that is community damaging, as well as to respond appropriately after questionable behavior has happened.
Yeah, I would agree with the last part for sure, that it's not restorative justice. One thing I did not clarify in the beginning is what is restorative justice versus criminal justice. And criminal justice is really, you have these sets of laws with prescribed punishments, right? You have a class X felony that's 6 to 30, 1 is 4 to 15, 2 is 3 to 7, 2 to 5, 1 to 4. And then misdemeanors are 364 days and below. But they're sentencing. That's all they are. A felony is just something you can be sentenced to jail for 1 year or more. That's literally what a felony means, which is a broad range of offenses, by the way. And so restorative justice is saying, okay, there's harm done, there's community harm done, there's relational damage, and the community justice should have some sense of healing and restoration. So it is still taking accountability. It's still working with the young person, addressing the harm that was done, but it's also as importantly understanding that this young person has been harmed. Most of the kids in the criminal justice system are victims and offenders. They were yesterday's victims. They've been most of them, I mean, like 100% of our clients have been living in chronic poverty their entire life. And when I'm talking poverty, I'm talking like I've gone into homes where there's a steel barrel in the kitchen with a fire and aluminum piping to get heat around to the house. Obviously incredibly dangerous, not a fire, major problem, but in the winter it keeps you relatively warm. Young people who have been evicted and come home to their stuff strewn all over the street, which is very embarrassing, right? I mean, if you think about that, you come home, your family's crying, your mom's crying, and you got private belongings all over the street for the whole neighborhood to see. Food, clothing.
So
And
Cliff, we lost you when you were describing the embarrassment of eviction.
So I just said that that's something that is a defining moment in a young person's life. They don't forget that. And most of the kids that we've worked with over the last 11 years started helping out their family with basic needs between the ages of 8 to 12. So I'm talking rent, utilities, food, and clothing. And there's no jobs for 8 to 12-year-olds. It's illegal to work. You can't even get a work permit. It's child labor. So we're talking about going out on the streets. We're talking about hustling, some of it legal, some of it illegal. Some of it is going to the local grocery stores and, asking for a quarter to take your groceries to your car, returning bottles for, recycled money, then ranging to stealing, to selling drugs, right? And then you start to live in, you're hustling because you're trying to help pay food, rent, and clothing, and it's basic needs. But then you also have a community that has suffered a lot of violence. And one of the things I think it's really important to understand, and I'm happy to share this I can email it to Jeff and you can send it out to everybody. But I wrote a 3-page history about North Lawndale. I think it's really important because when you start to talk about crime rates and violent crime and education, graduation rates, that narrative can feed a lot of racism. It can feed a lot of inerrant assumptions about what's happening in the neighborhood and are they really caring for themselves or their community. And one of the things I think is just really important that we understand is how we got to where we got to today. And so the paper that I wrote was really just for us at the Legal Center, was understanding the generational life of the African Americans who moved into Chicago through the 1930s to the 60s. The migration from the South up north, hoping for a better life. A lot of them moved into North Lawndale. It used to be a Jewish community. And I'm skimming over a lot of history here, but the rampant racism that they were experiencing when they came here, white flight, everybody fled. I mean, immediately, Dr. King lived in North Lawndale. I don't know if you all know this, but he talked about Chicago having hatred and racial violence worse than Birmingham, worse than the South. And you have, most of white families started generational wealth from my parents and my grandparents because of the federal, the FDIC, the Federal Housing Authority, and the federal mortgage system, that they had these federally banked mortgages. But white people couldn't afford their homes. We couldn't buy our suburban homes. We got loans. Why did we get loans? Because we were perceived not to be a credit risk. Again, there's that subject of determination. What we know from history, if you don't know this, look it up, redlining. The banks were flagrantly discriminating against Black communities and Black people. They refused to give them mortgages because they were deemed to be red areas were the areas where you didn't get a mortgage, and they were all Black neighborhoods. And so you have rampant discrimination in housing, employment. I mean, this is in my lifetime. This is 70s and 80s. I'm alive. There was a contract buyers league in North Lawndale, 350 people brought to, and it also creates this vacuum to bring in predatory lending because now you can't get a legitimate mortgage. And so you now have all these not great people who want to come in and take advantage and prey on poverty. And so they were doing contract buying, and they would flagrantly change the contract terms after they collected a down payment. But the difference is they never got title. So they weren't paying equity. They were essentially paying rent, and the person still owned it. Then they would flip it, default them, and then they would do it again and again to different families, take their down payment, and basically just, really defraud people. And so that was rampant in North Lawndale in the 80s, 70s and 80s. And so, we didn't get here overnight. This is, if you do a criminal justice history, emancipation was a myth. In 1869 or 1864, Emancipation Proclamation, 13th Amendment had an exception clause. It said, unless slavery was abolished unless you have a conviction for a crime. And it produced this new form of slavery called convict leasing. And by all accounts, it was worse than slavery because now you don't have a property interest in the slave, which you shouldn't have never had in the first place, but at least you had an interest in keeping them alive because you owned them. Now you don't own them, you lease them. And you literally don't care if you work them to death because you got them for 4 years. And if they don't live to year 5 because you worked them so hard, you don't care. And so convict leasing was bad. But then you go into the 60s, which is, again, recent history. I went on this journey called the Sankofa journey. Some people call it Justice Journey, but you get on a bus, you go down all these monuments and places down in the South for all these civil rights landmarks. And, one of them was 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. What I learned there, and I did not learn this in elementary school, and I should have. This stuff civil rights history should be something we learn in grade school. I had to learn it as an adult man because I was living in North Lawndale, and I realized there were some real problems. And so I've gone into a deep study of civil rights history. I've read a lot of books, and I've read a lot of Christian leaders in the civil rights movement. And to me, it's the right perspective of the gospel. But there was 50 churches bombed that year. 50 bombed in Birmingham. It was called Birmingham. So we think of, I thought of 16th Street was like this, one-off bad thing. 50 in 1 year. And what's even more appalling is it's done usually in concert with the police, or with them at least turning their cheek going the other way, if not directly with them. But even beyond that too, there was also no civil remedies. So it wasn't just that you could harm Black people openly and flagrantly with lynching and bombing, but they also couldn't then sue for any property damage. You bombed my house and I was already paycheck to paycheck. I got no recourse under the law.
Mm.
Who funds your group?
At all. And we have to, or it will repeat itself over and over and over and over again.
So, Cliff, we had just lost you at something about, I forgot the words. You mentioned convict leasing. I did not know anything about convict leasing until I read it today. In Brian.
In the Just Mercy. I didn't even realize it was in Just Mercy.
Yeah, it's like just a paragraph or so.
Gotcha.
We have just a few minutes left before anybody has to leave the call. I did want to mention that we've taken today and last Wednesday a very important opportunity to hear from some experts in prison reform, and then from the legal defense angle that Cliff represents. We're going to return for one final session next Wednesday, September 2nd at 1 o'clock to do our best to kind of tie things together that we've learned the previous 4 sessions, and certainly return to themes in the book. We might have time for maybe one more question or comment before we let Cliff go.
Yeah, I was wondering where do you get the funding for your Lawndale group, and how many lawyers do you employ, and how many cases are you able to handle a year?
Yeah, so we are no longer just me. 10 years ago, it was just me. We now have about 50 staff. I'm a full-time executive director. We're handling about between 350 and 400 cases a year. We have, of our staff, a third are lawyers. We have about 10 or 11 lawyers right now, and then about equal numbers of case managers and outreach workers. And then, of course, our wraparound community support partners, but they're not under our budget, although sometimes we do raise money and subcontract with them. I think that was did I answer all of your question? Oh, and how do we raise the money? So it's a mix of individual small and large donors, companies, firms, a lot of foundations, a lot of family foundations. There's a lot of grant writing, grant making, and then we've had city, county, and state, mostly county and some state. I'm expecting to get more state money now with Juliana Stratton. Government money hasn't been a big part of what we do, but I think it could become bigger, especially as we scale. And if there was an organization in New York called the Bronx Defender's Office, and they took over one whole borough for indigent defense, I would like to take over indigent defense for 24 and under. Now, in partnership with the Public Defender's Office and transforming it or displacing it, either way, I don't really care. I have great respect for Amy Campanelli, and I'm hoping it's to transform it, but it's got to get done whatever way it needs to get done. But we're split kind of evenly between like foundations, government, individual, small and large donors, corporations, and firms.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad you're in existence, for sure. It's
Well,
a
thank
step-
you.
Great step forward.
Is there another comment or question that we could take maybe in just a minute or two from any participant? Not seeing anything else. Cliff, do you have anything else you would like to share with us in a minute or two?
Well, I guess in 1 minute, I would say, we always need support, and I am not exaggerating when I say I believe we can transform criminal justice here in Cook County and then across the country with the poverty lab evaluation, with the 880 people that are going to be evaluated, with the public defenders sort of business as usual in this holistic community-based model, with the chief judge who's doing restorative justice community courts, which we helped design and launch. I was the chair of the committee with the presiding judge to launch that court and design it and launch it here in North Lawndale. It's for 18 to 24-year-olds charged with felonies. We have a network of hubs across the city of Chicago who all hire from the neighborhood, who serve young people from the neighborhood, all justice involved, street involved, youth from the neighborhood, 24 and under. We have agreements with them to slide lawyers in. We can do this. We can do this. But we can't do it without support and help. And it's not just money. I would say, I would say two things. One, you can give financially, but the other thing is we really need to make up for a lack of good public education. There's so much that I think we'd be so farther down the road on racism and institutional racism if we actually did learn our history accurately from grade school up until college. There's so much about the civil rights movement I did not know, and the depth of the harm, the breadth of it, and up into recent history, and then the statistics around the billions of dollars. If you take 869 officers at 10th District and 11th District, there's only 35,000 people in North Lawndale. That's a lot of spend to police a small group of people, right? And this is on the cusps of everything else that we've done with criminal justice to keep status quo, with convict leasing, black codes, arresting black people when they were freed from slavery for being unemployed and homeless. So I would say dive into accurate civil rights history and understanding the struggle for freedom in our country. It's critical. It's critical. We all know this. We have a responsibility to teach our children. My children will know the ins and outs of everything of our history and struggle for freedom. But then the other thing is, on the optimistic, hopeful side, we have great people in government at the state, at the county, Kim Fox, Amy Campanelli, Chief Judge Evans, Pritzker, and Juliana. Juliana really is the reformer. Our local commissioners, Commissioner Deere. We have an opportunity to do some really good work together. And I think that if you have any interest in supporting it, please, you can go to our website, follow up with me later. But it does take resources to scale this across Cook County.
Cliff, could you send some resources that you would recommend we read to get a more accurate view of the civil rights movement and racism in this country to Jeffrey so that he could distribute? Thank you.
Yep, I've already got it. I can say, well, once I get my new laptop, I'll hit send.
Thank you. Cliff, like the book Just Mercy, which there's a lot of sadness and broken lives that have been broken by the system, by a broken system, but there's also the persistence of hope and for reform and newness. This is what I've heard from you today, is that there's a lot of detail here and a lot of brokenness in our system, but two things give me a lot of hope today. One is you think Cook County could be turned around and thus be a model for the rest of the state and nation. This is really good news. And secondly, that there's people like you who are so knowledgeable and passionate about this, and you're making great change. Thank you, Cliff, for your time.
Thank you.
And for you.
Thank you.
God's
Thank you.
peace.
Thank you.
Thank you. And God bless you all too. Thank you.